days of a long time ago when they were cutting across the tracks and whatnot, the railroad would lay a few yards of track and the steam engine would come up right behind them. And as the men were working and going further and further, the train kept pulling up materials. They'd bring in the aggregate that they needed for the bedding materials, brought up the ties that they would use to set down, they'd bring up the rails that they would set on the ties, and they would bring up the spikes that would be used to pin the rails right to the ties. Then they would have a whole car full of tools with shovels and pry bars, axes, wheelbarrows, you name it, it was all on there, and sledgehammers. And then there would be another car with bunk beds for the men to sleep in and that. And then there would be another car with long tables and benches for the fellas to eat in. Then there would be another car with a kitchen set up with stoves and ovens and all kinds of things and all the pots and pans that they would need to fix up the food to feed all these fellas. And then there'd be another supply car attached to that with all the foodstuffs, and then finally a caboose. The railroad thought of everything, but the only thing that they missed was to hire a cook. And what they would do, they would just assign a fella to be the cook. And that fella would have to go and do that and fix up food for all these fellas that were putting down the tracks and all of that. And then what would happen is he'd be the cook for as long as it took for somebody to complain about how bad his cooking was. And when that happened, then it was that fella's turn to become the cook. Now it just so happened there was an Irishman, just over. Old Paddy come over there now, and a greenhorn Irishman he was. And he took a job, he wanted to go west and that, and he took a job laying the track and that so that he could make his way westward. And he was there, and got there now, he set to eating and he liked the food. He liked to eat any other time except here. Because on the railroad there now, the food was so bad, all he did was complain and complain and complain until the gaffer heard him and said, "All right, wise guy, you're going to be the cook." Now up until that point in his life, I don't think he ever put water in a kettle and swung it over the crane over a turf fire at home to boil water for tea. He hadn't a clue what he was doing. He said, "All right, I'll be the cook." And he cooked as best as he could. And had he been cooking today, I think his motto would have been, when it's smoking, it's cooking, when it's burned, it's done. And if he'd had a smoke alarm, he'd have used that as a timer, because everything looked like the coal that was being shoved in the engine. But as bad as his cooking was, no one ever complained. But then he was walking around and they were cutting through the prairies. And it was one fine morning after he got the breakfast done, and he was walking out there, and it was a cool morning, and they're out on the prairies, and at that time there was hundreds of thousands of buffaloes. And he looked there on the ground, and there on the ground was a great big blob of buffalo flop. And he said, "Well, I'll fix one of these fellas." And he went and got an Irish banjo, one of those big old coal shovels with the wide facing on it, and he shoved it under there, and he took that buffalo flop back to the kitchen car. Got a book out and learned how to make a bit of dough. And he mixed it all up and he rolled it out and put it in a pie pan and took that buffalo flop and put it right in there. Then he took some more dough and put it over the top and put some fancy marks in there, and then pinched it around the edges with his thumbs and popped it in the oven, and he baked it. And that night he set it down at the end with all the other desserts. And the first fella through was a big old man, geez, from the west of Ireland, looked like a gorilla in the zoo. Knuckles dragging on the ground, hair coming out of his ears and eyes and every place else. He was the first one through, and he gets to the end and he looks there and he sees the pie. And he cuts off a big old hunk of that old pie. And he throws it on his plate. And he sets himself down. And by God, there he stuck his fork in it first off because he liked desserts, and he shoved it in his mouth. And he shot up like a missile, and he said, "Oh my God, that's buffalo turd pie. But it's good though." And that's how old Paddy retired as a cook on the railroad. But as hard a job.
Every morning at 7 o'clock, there's 110 years of drilling at the rock. The boss comes down and he says, "Keep still, come down heavy and the caster and drill, and drill ye terriers drill. Drill ye terriers drill, always work all day for the sugar in your tea, down behind the railway, and drill ye terriers drill, and blast and fire." One Well, the boss was a good man down to the ground, and he had a wife about 6 feet round. She baked good bread and she baked it well, but she baked it hard as the holes of hell. Oh, drill ye terriers drill, drill ye terriers drill. Oh, it's work all day for the sugar in your tea, down behind the railway. And drill ye terriers drill, and blast and fire. Well, the foreman's name was Jean McCann. My God, he was a blame mean man. Last week a premature blast went off, and a mile in the air went a big Jim Goff. Oh, drill ye terriers drill, drill ye terriers drill. Oh, it's work all day for the sugar in your tea, down behind the railway. And drill ye terriers drill, and blast and fire. Well, the next time payday came around, Jim Goff $1 short was found. When asked what for came this reply, you were ducked for the time you were up in the sky. Oh, drill ye terriers drill, drill ye terriers drill. Oh, it's work all day for the sugar in your tea, down behind the railway. And drill ye terriers drill, yes, drill ye terriers drill. Oh, it's work all day for the sugar in your tea, down behind the railway. And drill ye terriers drill, and blast and fire.
It's time to tell you about this piece. This piece of equipment was used by the Gandy dancers, the lads that went out and fixed the track. How did they get the name of Gandy dancers? It had all to do with the Irish. Long time ago, when they were setting the rails and that, they had fellas out there with shovels, picks, axes, wheelbarrows, and whatever kind of tools they would need to lay the track. Put in the bedding material and the tires and then the rails, and to spike them down with sledgehammers with big spikes. When they needed repairs, the Gandy dancers would go out. How did they get that name? Well, it seems that way back when, there was a shovel company out of Chicago, Illinois, the Gandy Shovel Company. And what would happen is when they wanted to shift a tie or shift a rail, they would shove their shovels underneath and push down on them and try to shimmy them where they had to go. Well, a lot of the fellas that was working on there, on the crews, were Irish. And they would shove her in there and push down, and their feet would come off the ground. And a lot of times it looked like they was dancing a jig. And so they became known as Gandy dancers. And that's the way it was told to me by Utah fellas.
In 1841, me corduroy breeches I put on. Me corduroy breeches I put on to work upon the railway, the railway. I'm weary of the railway. Poor Paddy works on the railway. In 1842, well, I moved from Hartlepool to Carew, and I found myself a job to do, working on the railway. I was wearing corduroy breeches, digging ditches, pulling switches, dodging hitches. I was working on the railway. And in 1843, I broke me shovel across me knee, and I went to work for a company on the Leave and Selby Railway. I was wearing corduroy breeches, digging ditches, pulling switches, dodging hitches. I was working on the railway. In 1844, I landed on the Liverpool shore. Oh, me belly was empty, me hands were raw from working on the railway, the railway. I'm weary of the railway. Poor Paddy works on the railway. And in 1845, when Daniel O'Connell, he was alive, Daniel O'Connell, he was alive and working on the railway. I was wearing corduroy on the railway. And in 1846 I changed my trade from carrying bricks. Changed my trade from carrying bricks to working on the railway. I was wearing my breeches, digging ditches, pulling switches, dodging hitches. I was working on the railway. And in 1847, poor Paddy was thinking of going to heaven. Oh, poor Paddy was thinking of going to heaven to